Okay. All right, so we have, I wanted to go through a few halachot, but based on certain Torah concepts. So we get to understand the concept and to take away the halacha. So we believe as follows. We believe that the Assyrian Greeks were attempting to remove the three core values of Judaism: Torah learning, prayer, anything related to prayer, and Gemilut Chasadim, and caring for others. Now, rabbis say that the underpinning of all they were trying to do was to uproot the three core tenets of Judaism and to really obviate Judaism, to do what's really happening in a lot of the world today, where there's nothing distinct about a particular religion. Everyone is looking for a universal perspective, and to remove any specialness, uniqueness, particular behavior of the Jewish people. When the Maccabim won, they did an interesting thing. It had been many years where the children were not learning Torah. So what did they do? They offered them money to come back to school. They literally offered the children money to come back to school, money and treats and toys and whatever it might have been. From that was highlighted a very interesting perspective in Judaism. And that perspective is mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. Anybody know what that means? Mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. So I want to explain the words. Hi, Carol. How are you? Hi, Joy. Thank you for joining. So, mitoch shelo lishma means that from a perspective of not sincere intention, a person will build sincere intention. Mitoch shelo lishma, from the perspective of insincerity, not in a negative way, just simply, they're not really, these kids didn't really want to learn Torah. When the Maccabees gave them money to go back to the Batei Midrash after they defeated the Assyrian Greeks, it's not that they were hostile to it, they were just out of it. So the rabbis went and the leaders went and they gave them treats and candies and literally coins to bring them back to learning Torah. You might say, and it's probably the case, that's where the Goyim took the Christmas gift idea from. And in any case, though, we, as part of the customs of Hanukkah, always had the custom of giving money to children and grandchildren. Now it evolved into gifts and toys and whatever. But the basis of it is the money that the children were given by the rabbis, by the leaders, to come back to learn Torah. The main perspective being from a perspective of lack of sincerity, I will build sincerity. So tell me what that means. It's atypical to Western thought, but it's a very strong Torah perspective. Hey, Jake, what do you think it means?
Hey, what's going on?
Don't we believe that with the mitzvot?
We do believe it with the mitzvot. Yes,
I think it's fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it. Great choice. So what does it mean? It is fake it till you make it. What does it mean?
It means even if you're doing something at first with the wrong intentions, like you're giving tzedakah to make yourself look good or to feel better, in the end, it's okay, because eventually you'll maybe do it for the right reason.
Beautiful. So we don't discount that, and we don't diminish it, and we don't talk it down in any way. Meaning that if we could get somebody to fake it till they make it, if we could get somebody involved in something Torah related, even for the wrong reasons, we do it. And we don't say that the lack of absolute good intent makes the action any less. In fact, we say, bring the person in, let them grow, help them build. And from this perspective of lack of real interest, shelo lishma, they'll build a perspective of sincerity and positive motivation. So give me some other examples. When would we use this type of approach?
We do it with chesed, with the school program. We make them do chesed and then hope that they'll eventually like it and do it themselves.
Exactly, right? We inundate them with certain core values. We inundate them with those core values, hoping that as a result of putting it into a school structure, for example, they're going to end up just being hardwired and end up doing it because that's just what we do. What else would you say? What else would you say? How else do we do it? By the way, it's a parenting tool as well, and it's a good one. And people discount it because they say, "Oh, what do you mean? You're gonna encourage a person to do something if they're doing it for the wrong reasons?" 100%, and it goes to relationships as well. You know, I can't remember how many conversations I've had where people have told me, "I'm not going to do this for her or for him because I'm doing it for him. I'm not doing it for me. I don't want to really do it." 1 second. The him or the her is the most important person in your life. B. A, it's good and fine to do something for reasons other than those that satisfy me. It's totally okay. And it doesn't make the action any less. In fact, it just positions it as a building block. What would be other examples of this? What do you say? How would you use it?
Is it also like bribing the people to
It's
learn?
absolutely like bribing the people. What do we do on the night of the Seder? What form does this take on the night of the Seder? We give the kids gifts. We give them snacks. In the ancient days, they used to give them nuts and raisins to keep them engaged. Every time a child answers a question on the night of the Seder, we're supposed to give them something. Well, shouldn't the child want to learn because he goes to school every day? Maybe, but not practically. And so we want to use these tools, and we shouldn't think that these tools make the effort any less. Where else would you say we would do it? Has anybody ever done it?
We do it in shul every week. We get the boys class, the girls class. We give them prizes all day. Yeah, they
That's
win
right.
raffles and stuff like that.
Excellent. We give them raffles. That's right. We give the kids toys when they come to shul. And when the kids now, they come to Sharet Zion at night, they have food and snacks and junk. It's all good. It's all good. And in fact, we should be doing more of it because that's addressing a legitimate need of a child or a grown-up to grow. And if it means having the person grow, initially for the wrong reasons, who cares? Now they're in the zone, they're ready to grow, they're ready to build. And over time, we believe so much in the strength of what we have to offer as a Torah people that we don't have a concern that the growth won't be good. Good? So, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma is an important concept in Judaism. And we should feel very comfortable using it, and we should know it, and we should own it. So in any educational forum, we want to be thinking about that top of mind. How are we making the kids feel, first and foremost? And then what content are we giving them over? That's absolutely secondary. So, you know, how do we gauge a teacher? A teacher should be gauged first and foremost by his or her energy and excitement and happiness and willingness to embrace the children emotionally and so on. And then the content, okay, 80-20, 80% human, 20% content. So, and the idea being, if someone learned with a teacher he or she cared for, they'll end up picking up that learning. A personal example, when I went to Israel to study for the year, my Rebbe there, my rabbi, was a French Jew who made Aliyah. He was a writer of children's books in France. He had a master's degree from one of the French universities, I think from the Sorbonne. He was writing children's books, comes to Israel, serves in the army, starts to write books on Jewish philosophy in Hebrew, continued to write his books on child stories in French, and he would start every class with a beautiful Hasidic song. And he had these fabulous blue eyes, and he had a beautiful voice, and he made me love his Torah. It was the love of him that brought me to the love of his Torah. So mitoch shelo lishma, did I love the Gemara he was teaching? Definitely not. Did I love him as a person? Absolutely. So it's not disingenuous, it's not manipulative, it's human and it's real. And it may also be where the custom came from to give gifts on this holiday, to remind us of the gifts that were given to bring the children back to learning. Okay, so far? Good? Good, okay. We have another interesting klal, or interesting axiom in Judaism, and that is that we never spoil a good time. We never spoil a good time. And how does this play out? We, an individual who had a bad dream, a very bad dream, or lo alenu, a bad incident in his or her life, can decide to declare a personal fast. I want to personally fast on day X. A person might say that because he or she is frightened by something, by an event that happened, by a dream that happened. Dreams can be very telling. And he or she declares a partial day or a full day fast. We say that a person can't declare something like that on Hanukkah, cannot declare something like that, because Hanukkah is a time of joy and celebration. Our rabbis extend it by saying, you can't do hespedim. No, we don't do eulogies on Hanukkah either, because it's a time of joy and celebration. There are stories of great rabbis who were in the middle of a conversation, and someone started to speak about something sad. And the rabbi stopped the conversation cold. So what does this tell you? What does this tell you? You can't eulogize on a holiday. You can't have a personal fast on a holiday. The rabbis would never declare a fast on a holiday. But the rabbis go one step further and say, you know what? It's not just about declaring a fast or eulogizing, but we don't even want to be talking about non-uplifting things on uplifting days. To the extent where a story is famously told that the rabbi went and shut the participant down and said, not today, not lishtok, please be quiet. So how would you apply that? How would you apply that? What do you say?
Mindset,
Huh?
the mindset.
That's a mindset. Yeah, what else? What would you do? Give me another way we would apply it.
It goes back to what you were saying about Shabbat, not to like read or talk about secular topics on Shabbat.
Right. So we shouldn't be reading a book about secular topics on Shabbat. What about talking about something that might bring the people in the room down on Shabbat?
Sounds like it wouldn't be okay.
It wouldn't be okay. Right. It wouldn't be okay. So we don't, God forbid something bad happens. We leave it till after Shabbat. We don't discuss it on Shabbat. We don't want to take away from a joyful time. So it's a top of mind perspective where, sometimes you're sitting in a long meal and someone will bring up something that happened or something negative going on in the news or something like that. But to the extent that puts a little bit of a damper on the day, we shouldn't be saying it. And the criteria should be that we don't diminish a good time. We keep the good time going. And us as Sfaradim, we have a particularly strong affinity to this. The Sfaradim always fought very hard to keep happy and to stay happy and to maintain happy as a state of mind. So on a Shabbat, on a Yom Tov, on a Hanukkah, we want to be in that perspective, and we want to say, you know what, if somebody starts a conversation otherwise, we want to stop it, because we want to fiercely guard the happiness of the time. Good. Okay. We'll do a few more. There's a very interesting halakha on Hanukkah that says that during the time that the candles are lit, women shouldn't be working. Women shouldn't be working, assuming the candles are lit for a half hour. They shouldn't be working during that time. And the commentators to the Shulchan Aruch who brings this halakha say davka nashim. Definitely women, more so than men. Meaning that if a man wanted to do a toil-related labor during the time the candles were lit, ideally he shouldn't do it, but he has more of the permission, so to speak, halachically, to do it than women do. So what's going on here? What do you say? Huh?
Because women determine the mindset in the house.
Women determine the mindset of the house, true. But we have two other criteria here. We have the criterion that, again, things we should own and have in our vocabulary. We have the criteria that af hen hayu bo'oto hanes, that with certain holidays, we say that a woman is involved and the mitzvot of the holiday are incumbent upon her because she also participated in the miracle. We've talked about this before. We know on the holiday of Pesach, for example, the arba kosot, the 4 cups of wine, the matzah maror, the telling of the story of the seder, all of those things are incumbent upon women, no less they are on men, because af hen hayu bo'oto hanes. Because
so why davka?
What do you mean davka?
You said more so women.
Davka, excellent. So excellent, perfect, Jake. So af hen hayu bo'oto hanes on Pesach means that they were included in the miracle. But on Hanukkah, we say hanes haya al yadam. They brought the miracle. So af hen hayu bo'oto hanes means that despite the fact that this happened in an ancient time period where women had almost zero power and the ability to affect things, they were significant participants in the miracle, and therefore the celebration of that miracle through the mitzvot is very much theirs as well as everybody else's. When it comes to Hanukkah, it's different, and they base it on the following. While this was going on in Israel, the officers of the enemy would, if they found out that a girl was getting married, they would take her and rape her before her wedding night in order to just continue what they wanted to do, which was to remove any sanctity from anything. One lady, the daughter of Yohanan, the Cohen Gadol, who was one of the Maccabim, her name was Yehudit. She, we believe, cooked up a food made of milk, fed it to this officer who was there to rape her before her marriage. She tires him out with the drink of this, with this warm drink, and she kills him. And that was one of the things our rabbis believe that created a panic in the armies of the enemy. So that Hanes Haya Al Yadam says that in this case, the role of the women was greater than it was even in the other cases, particularly in the case of Pesach, and therefore, when the most overt expression of the miracle and its celebration goes on, the lighting of the candles, they should be the ones to celebrate it primarily. So any work that's toil-oriented, that's not something that can be done simply and effortlessly, they should be exempted from. Now, some people say, okay, exempt the men as well. You can. It's nice for everybody to be focused on the candles and celebrating and reading and learning about the holiday during that 30 minutes or so. But particularly, we want the women to be doing that as a recognition of their contribution. So in this case, it's a nice thing to practice. But even more so, it's important to know that we have different areas here. We have the area where the woman is included in the mitzvah because she was, extraordinarily speaking in terms of ancient possibilities, she was a partner to the miracle. And then you have the cases like here where we say she was more than a partner. Hanes haya al yadam. And this is the language that the rabbis use, and it's important language to own as well, that they brought the miracle on, not that they were partners to it. Okay, so far? Good? Great. Okay. When was well, we know that we have a halacha to light candles in the shul before it gets dark and in the mornings. What's that about? Why do we light the Hanukah with a beracha in the synagogues before it gets dark, before the time of the mitzvah actually kicks in, and again in the morning?
We said Pirsamei Hanes, no? Last week?
Pirsamei Hanes, excellent, good, great. Now, who is anybody Yotzei Yedei Chovah with that lighting? Is anybody fulfill their obligation when they see it lit in the synagogue?
No.
No.
No,
Not their household.
Okay, good. It doesn't, they're not fulfilled. Why? Because also it's not at the time that we prescribe. Good. So because it's not fulfilled, who lights it? Who should light it? So it's very interesting. We end up saying like this. We want to have this additional persumenisa. We want to have the additional publication of this great miracle. Therefore, when a lot of people are in synagogue, we're going to do it there as well. But does anybody fulfill their core obligation with that? No, they just have an add-on of celebration. So because it's an add-on of celebration and no one's fulfilling their obligation directly, then you have a minor. You can have a kid light the Hanukah, because being that nobody has to be Yotzei Yedei Chovah, being that nobody's obligation to see the candles can be fulfilled in the synagogue, the person who lights them doesn't have to be of age to enable people to fulfill it. Good, let's go again real quick. We have this add-on of lighting in the synagogue. The add-on of lighting in the synagogue is a pure bonus, it's pure pleasure in order to further promote the beauty of the holiday. But when something is done collectively, the person who's doing it has to be in a position that his obligation is equal to the people who are listening. Someone who blows the shofar has to have an obligation to hear the tkiot, just like the people who are there. Somebody who reads the Sefer Torah has to have an obligation to do so. Because otherwise, if he doesn't have an obligation to this mitzvah, he can't have other people fulfill it with his representation. But in this case, because it's only an extra, it's not something that is obligatory and fulfills anything on a specific mitzvah level, then the person lighting the Hanukah can be anybody.
So it's not the Shomea Keoneh type of situation.
Yeah, beautiful, Jake. It's not Shomea Koheneh. In other words, it doesn't. It's exactly not that. Shomea Koheneh would mean that the person who's blowing the shofar, the person who's reading the Megillah, has to have the same level of obligation as the people he is representing, the people he is then exempting from the mitzvah by doing it and saying it and them listening. So in this case, we have the opposite situation. In fact, we don't want to, we can't have somebody who's technically obligated to do it because it's not the right time.
Right.
So we specifically have someone who's not obligated. So it's very curious and interesting that we have a mitzvah that's not being done at its prescribed time. And because it's not being done at its prescribed time, and the person who's doing it, the people who are seeing it aren't really fulfilling their obligations, they're just getting a bonus, then the person who's doing it should be someone who can't fulfill the obligations.
Ricky,
Yes.
is a woman obligated to light the menorah, or only if somebody in the household can't do it?
No, woman's absolutely obligated. She has the same obligation as the men. She has absolutely the same obligation. So if the woman is going to be out of the house that night and somebody else in the house is lighting it, they're lighting it on her behalf as well. And if there's and if the woman is home at whatever it is, 4:35, 4:45, whenever Set HaKochavim, that whenever the stars come out 15 minutes after sunset, if the woman is home, then she should take the initiative to light because she has the same obligation that anybody else does.
But it's not a mitzvah shebizman grama. I thought it's not like that.
Very good. No, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Excellent question. Why isn't it a mitzvah that's time bound and time prescribed, and therefore women don't have to do it? Why not?
Any time of night, no?
It's any time of night, true, but it's still time specific. I have to do it at night within this couple of hours.
Mhm.
So why isn't it considered a time prescribed mitzvah that women are fundamentally exempt from? This is very important. Why not?
I guess you're saying they were involved in the miracle.
Because they
so
were
maybe-
involved, right?
No,
Yeah.
but it's more than that. We have other halachic criteria here that are very important to know. So a woman can be exempted from a time-specific mitzvah.
Oh,
if
I know why.
that- Why? Go ahead.
Only because somebody else could do the mitzvah for her. It's just in case she can't do it. Meaning she doesn't have a back. This is like a backup. She has a backup. just in case she can't.
Maybe, but go one step earlier. Go one step earlier. Very important to know. Great question. Very important to know. The rabbis came in and said that women are exempted from time-specific mitzvot, like sitting in the sukkah and so on, yeah?
No, I'm saying exempt. I don't think exempted. is-
Oh, exempt. She's
Sorry.
correcting my English. I appreciate that. Thank you. That women are exempt from time-specific.
All right, Uncle Jim. I mean,
Isn't
Auntie
that
Jim.
great? Isn't that great?
Thanks, Jake.
The mitzvot that rabbis can act on, Serene, are Torah-based mitzvot. So the rabbis can say, and it's a fascinating thing, that this mitzvah comes from the Torah. God gave us this mitzvah, but we, the rabbis, declare that the women can't be pulled away from what they're doing to do it. So we, the rabbis, say, prescribe it and edit out the women from having an obligation to do it. So interestingly, the only halachot, the only mitzvot that women can be exempted from because they're time bound are the oraita, are biblical. Therefore, a woman is exempted from sitting in the sukkah. Sitting in the sukkah is a biblical commandment incumbent on every Jewish adult. The rabbis come and say, but wait a minute, a woman is taking care of children. She's preparing the meals. She's building the home, sanctity of the home. So how can you tell her she's got to sit in the sukkah? You know what? Even though that's a deoraita, a biblical mandated mitzvah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the rabbis come in and say, but not for the ladies. Good? So it's an almost upside down. But the rabbinic mitzvot, like Chanukah, which the rabbis designed from the outset, they from the outset establish who should be part of that mitzvah and not.
Nice.
You would
Isn't
think
that
it's
great?
the opposite, but you would think it's the opposite. How
You
could the
would-
rabbi say?
That's why it's so exciting. You would
Right.
think it's the opposite. That's why it's so exciting. the rabbis act on the biblically mandated mitzvot to carve out the women. So whenever you see a mitzvah that's time specific that the women are exempted from, you know that that's a biblical mitzvah. That's a HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave that mitzvah. On the other hand, when you see mitzvot like Chanukah or Purim or things like that, where the women are obligated, you know that when the rabbis were thinking about it and designing it, they had in mind exactly which constituencies they wanted to include. And if a woman is involved, is obligated to a time-sensitive mitzvah, it's probably rabbinic, and it was designed that way from the outset.
What is the intention there?
You tell me.
I would say, just from an inclusive perspective, to have them be able to do things that, they wouldn't be able to, because it's time bound. So here they want to kind of include them. That would be my guess, but I don't know.
Yeah. What's that? Yeah.
I mean, this particular, I don't know which other ones that women are, like if there's any other examples of time-bound mitzvot that women are supposed to do that are rabbinic, but this one seems pretty easy because like the woman's in the house anyway. She's not cooking a meal at the time. It's like, it seems like it's a logical thing that they're going to be available.
Does a woman have to hear the Megillah?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's time specific as well, right?
Right. But I'm
That's
saying like,
something-
they're not, yeah, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how they think it's okay.
You
It
could say
is.
with the Torah, though, that's time to feed the kids and put them to bed, and it's a
Right.
hectic time. I mean, you're doing home,
With what, Joy? To
Right.
say with what?
Lighting candles.
But for Hanukkah, she's saying, oh, what is it? It's not like a meal and whatever, but it's when your kids are, it's about the kids usually that
Right.
women are exempt. So, but.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it's not
what I find
necessarily, yeah.
Right.
It's not necessarily an easy time, but the rabbis say, you know what, in this case, the woman's role was outstanding enough, and the benefit of this mitzvah for the woman outweighs any sacrifice. Whereas in other cases, they'll say, you know what, the sacrifice outweighs the engagement with this mitzvah. It's a remarkable latitude that the rabbis are given and they take. So, yeah.
If you think about it, though, if the rabbis had to make this holiday, then they had to get everybody on board to get it accepted. So maybe if they didn't include the women,
Could be.
they might have been shut down. Who knows?
It could be. It could be. We know Esther Amakah.
Like you men are doing this, and you're not. You know what I'm saying? Like at that point,
Yeah.
maybe women needed to be included and wanted to be included.
I think it's a very good point. We know there's a back and forth in the Gemara Masechet Megillah where Esther Amalkah demands of the rabbis that they recognize Purim and that they recognize the Megillah as a God-inspired document, a document inspired by Ruach HaKodesh with divine insight. And it took the rabbis several years, we believe. Hey, Erwin, it took the rabbis several.
My video's out, so I'm sorry.
Okay, all right, good to have you. It took the rabbis several years in order to agree with Esther Amalkah that Purim should be considered a holiday. And she fought like a tiger and she won. And she beat them all. And she brought everybody around to the fact that this is a mitzvah. So in the case of Purim as well, every single mitzvah on Purim, the women are absolutely equally obligated, as are the men. So, mitzvot are designed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the rabbis, we understand, to build a human being, to bring that person to another place. So to the extent that, it could be to your point, Joy, that, this was the only way it was going to work. And that could very well be that the women had a strong voice in it. Yeah.
Also, when the rabbis made the laws about the Deoraita, the biblical commandments, was it like an earlier set of rabbis? Like maybe as time went on and the rabbis became a little more modern and they brought these new holidays, maybe they realized like it's a new world, women are allowed to participate, like that it happened in that order?
Something, these were pretty early. Esther Malkah is very early, 70 years after the destruction of the first temple.
Right.
This is really second temple period. It's really pretty early, but it doesn't mitigate your point. The point is that there was something happening here. There was definitely something happening. The world was definitely changing. And the question arises, where does this ultimately go? We know that, as we've said many times, that the final Geulah, the final redemption, will also be driven by the women. And so serious thinking people today are really weighing very carefully, well, what level of scholarship are we giving to our women today? And is it really up to par? Because if we are in this next level of the Jewish destiny, which many people believe we are, with the state of Israel being an extraordinary focal point in the world, in a few years, there'll be more people in the land of Israel, more Jews in the land of Israel than in any other country. And a few years after that, there'll be more Jews in the land of Israel, maybe than there are in the rest of the world. So things are changing dramatically and quickly, and the role of the women in that, has to be considered. And to the extent that we educate women has to be thought about as well. There's a very strong emphasis and focus now, or coming into focus now, of women having a very high level of halakha knowledge. And that's something that, some of us believe should have happened for generations. But in any case, at this point, even in many of the super Orthodox circles, there are very important books that have been published to help women master some of the core elements of halakha. Because to your point, Serene, the role of the woman has to be fundamental and assertive and leader-oriented to everything that's going on. If so, then she has to be in the know, and she has to be in the action, so to speak, right? She has to be doing the mitzvot. She has to be aware of them. She has to be doing the halachot. So, I think this is certainly evolving. And Hanukkah, the later holidays like Hanukkah and Purim absolutely feature and highlight the woman's role. And maybe and possibly they're a segue to things to come. A lot of scholars say today that ultimately when the story of the Shoah comes out, when the pain is less and the history is clearer, and when that's coupled with the founding of the state of Israel, then the women's roles are gonna come to the top as well here. The women's heroism, the women's strength in each of those areas will be very much highlighted. So good. Okay. Any other?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
A little bit coming from the other angle. The sects that don't accept like the Torah Sheba'al Peh, is this where it comes from? Like how the rabbis said that the women shouldn't do things like tefillin, things like that? Is that?
Yeah, these are all Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's great. So here I'm gonna pick up this book that I'm using for tonight's class, right? So on top here is Maran Shulchan Aruch, right? The Shulchan Aruch, who goes and he reads the Rambam Maimonides, who Maimonides summarized, so to speak, the thousands of pages of the Talmud, which was the oral law. Maimonides read it and summarized it, and told us what the bottom lines were. 500 years later, Maran came and he updated it to include the things that had to be spoken about at that time. And 350 years later, these rabbis came. And when you look on this page here, these are the contemporary rabbis. So there are thousands and thousands of pages like this, which means, let's say you have fire, for example. You have fire in ancient times, right? Now you have electricity, a couple 150 years ago. Now, Maimonides, 1,000 years ago, Harambam, like we said, right? He went and summarized the Talmud. Maimonides would say that obviously, lo tefa'aru esh, fire is prohibited to burn on Shabbat. Good. 500 years later, let's say, or 600 years later, now we have this thing called electricity. Now, what is electricity? Halachically, what is it? So the rabbis will weigh in on it. Some will say, you know what? The fire was the primary force in shaping things in the world. Well, we're going to call electricity fire. So they will say, you know what? You can't turn on a light on Shabbat because you can't light a flame on Shabbat. Now, the Ethiopian Jews, the Falashim, who sat without rabbinical law for 2,000 years, didn't know what electricity was. And they wouldn't have called it fire, and they wouldn't have said that it's prohibited on Shabbat. So, what is rabbinic law? Rabbinic law is inherent, it's fundamental to Judaism because HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't want a stagnant document. I want there to be 70 different opinions or more. I want it to be evolving. I want it to be moving. And I want it overwhelmingly at the end of the day, there'll never be an end of the day in this respect. I want it to be the work of man, not me. So to your point, Rachel, the Torah Shebe'al Peh, the oral law, is really everything. It's everything. And that's why people who are studying are spending 95% of their time on the oral law, because that's where the action is. That's where the excitement is. That's where the conflict is. That's where the greatness of the human experience is. Because I understand electricity as esh, and you don't. Well, now we have another interesting question. Like I think we mentioned it maybe during COVID. What if you have a modern state of Israel, where you have the electric company is run by Jews, providing electricity to Jews on Shabbat. Now what? What do we do? Turn off the lights? Huh?
No, Ricky, can't you do like you have a store, you sell it to the guy or whatever?
Okay, but over here we can't sell it. We have security issues, security concerns. We
Right.
can't have somebody else come in and run the electric grid for a Jewish
Right.
country, right? What do you do in a hospital where the doctor is Jewish and the patients are Jewish, and the patient is not life-threatened, God forbid, but the person is not well and is in the hospital? How do you monitor the health of that patient? Because now that we declared that electricity is esh, is fire, meaning we can't use it on Shabbat, but what do we do? We have to do something. We have to run an electric grid in a country. We have to have a hospital run. We have to have defenses run.
Right.
When they sent the spaceship to the moon, if you remember, some of us talked about it, they built in the issues to have the astronauts on that spaceship not be mechalel Shabbat, not violate the Shabbat. So, Rachel, to your question, all of these areas are rabbinic. So what do we do now, for example, just to be more specific, what do we do in a hospital? We do something called girama. Jake, you learned about this? Grama, the Ashkenazim call it girama. What is girama? We say like this: we need to do this EKG. This machine has to be functioning on Shabbat. Again, if the person is life-threatened, there's nothing to talk about. But if the person is not life-threatened, but it's a test that should be taken, so what we do is we set up this specific machine where when the switch is turned on, right, there's a pause, and there's a pause, and then the current kicks in. Now that pause, called girama, it means it's causal. Ligrom means to cause. It takes away the directness of the effort. So once the absolute directness of the effort goes away, where a person flicked a switch and the machine went on, and now it becomes a person flicked a switch, there was a pause, and then the machine went on. If there are extenuating circumstances, that's the way we can do it on Shabbat. So we need extenuating circumstances like a hospital or national security or men in space or defense or whatever it might be. Then B, we need to come up with something halachic that only, to your question, Rachel, only man can come up with. And these are the things. What do you do? Well, let's say, what is it called when we take a mother's eggs and we implant it into another lady? What is it called?
IVF.
Huh?
In vitro.
In vitro. In vitro?
Mhm.
Okay, great. In vitro. Now you have Sarah put her eggs into Rivka. Now Rivka, right, gives birth to the babies, right? Who's the mother? Who's the mother? Who's the halachic mother? Now, if you didn't have rabbinic law, you're done. You can't talk to an issue like this. But now that you have rabbinic law, the rabbis could say, well, wait a second. What determines motherhood? Is it the lady who carried the babies? Is it the lady who gave the initial seed, the initial eggs to these babies? Who is it? Now, the greatness of Judaism, hey, Cynthia, how are you? The greatness of Judaism is that the rabbis have the capacity, because of thousands of books like this with tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of pages of scholarship, to think about, well, what do we do with in vitro? That child has to have someone who she calls mom. Who is it halachically? That's a very important question. The questions go on and on and on. We talked about it in one class. If someone has a brain transplant, there'll be a day when there can be brain transplants, right? Now we have heart transplants. There may be a day when there will be a brain transplant. Who is the person who gets that new brain? Halachically, is he the first person or the second person? Yeah, so we have simple questions, we have complex questions. Can we light, now that we say that Ish is electricity, right? We said that fire, Ish, is electricity. Good. Well, why can't I light a Hanukah on Hanukah with lights? If I'm going to say, on the one hand, that electricity is fire, why can't I use electricity to light my Shabbat candles or to light my Hanukah? So these are the kinds of questions that the rabbis will deal with. And this is what we believe is the pounding heart of Judaism. It's oxygen, it's excitement, it's truth, and its ability to be forever. Because if it was a stagnant document, it would have died out a long time ago. And our job, you know what, Rabbi Soloveitchik, he said something fantastic. He said, men and women should learn the different opinions about something. But you know what's the most valuable thing they should do? He says, what do you think? What's the most valuable thing they should do? They learn the opinions about an in vitro situation, or how to solve the problem with electricity on Shabbat when you don't have an absolute life-threatening need, or whatever the thousands of cases that will come up constantly. He says, Rabbi Soloveitchik, he says, the most exciting thing for us is to study the other opinions and then
Argue about it.
Argue and then
Come up with your
come
own.
up with my own. Come up with my own. Now, my opinion has to be bounded by the rigor of Jewish halachic thinking, which is actually very broad, but be in it and build with it. So, long answer to a short question, Rachel, but that's what rabbinic law is, and that's the vibrancy of Judaism.
So I wanted, yeah.
Yeah, again.
I just want to clarify if I'm understanding something, because I might be pulling two separate things. So if you deny that, right, there are some people that only go by the written, Torah Shebiktav.
Right.
Would they say that the time-bound mitzvot that are the oraita that the women should do? Because they don't
Absolutely.
go by the, right, okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Is
Great.
that
Great.
what we're seeing today, like with tefillin or things like that? Like with
So-
where reform, where they're trying to, is that what they're
I think more
standing
progressive.
on?
Yeah, I think the reform and conservative are coming from the perspective of we are not absolutely bound by halakha. We're
No,
not
but
bound by halakha, right? Yeah, Jake?
no, I would say that the conservative reform movement to me is more of like a kind of a liberal progressive approach where, women are equal. Why can't women put tefillin on? That's, to me, I think
Right.
is part, but I think
Right,
it's maybe.
but they say women are not, we are not bound by rabbinic law. We do what we are going to move with the times. So
Correct.
so when we adjudicate law, we do it within a broad framework of learning. There are guidelines to the learning. Nobody can say that a pig will ever be kosher. It will never be kosher. Well, what do you mean? Isn't it meat like any other meat? Can it be slaughtered the same way a cow is slaughtered? Yeah. But the Torah says it's not kosher. It will never be kosher. Now, so there are certain absolutes that will never change. That's where the breakdown is between Orthodox and other groups, where they say, well, why not? Why shouldn't it change? Recently there was a very unfortunate thing this week where the conservative movement had their first lesbian wedding. They had their first lesbian wedding. See, there will never be, that will never happen. Stuff like that can never happen. So the rabbis have tremendous latitude within a certain framework of thought. So we can qualify certain things, we can further define certain things, we can broaden certain things, but they're all still within a rubric of thought, right? And that's the point here. And the arguments over the centuries, to your point, have been, well, what is the rubric of thought? Some people say, well, the rabbi should be excluded from that. It should only be the written law. It shouldn't be anybody else. Other people should say, well, if the rabbi 2,000 years ago said X, I'm going to say what I want. But wait a minute, you can't say what you want, right? Because we have a process that rabbi voiced his opinion through. And if you use that process, it's fine. But if you don't, it's not fine. So it's a dynamic process. It's a little bit of a it's a complex process in certain respects, but it's built on core fundamental criteria. Nobody could wake up and say, you know what, you can also worship a tree. No matter what, they can't say that. They just can't possibly say that. But people can say, there are the obligation of women to pray. Is it once a day or 3 times a day? That's a great question. Well, what is prayer? What defines prayer? Is prayer an obligation to say something, or is it an opportunity to share what's in your heart? Well, we have verses that say that prayer is an obligation to say something. We have verses that say that prayer is an expression of what's in your heart. So based on that, we have 2 opinions on prayer. One opinion is that for women, one opinion is that women only have to pray once a day because prayer is an obligation. The other opinion says that, you know what? Prayer is not simply an obligation, it's an opportunity to express yourself. And that opinion says that women should pray 3 times a day. So where do we end up? We end up, women have an obligation to pray once a day, but an opportunity to pray 3 times a day. That's the kind of the kind of consideration that we'll have, just as a quick example. Is that
Ricky?
helpful? Yeah.
You were saying that Rabbi Soloveitchik was saying like you're supposed to, come up with your own and read about all the different opinions, but aren't there certain rabbis over the centuries that wanted to unite the people and come up with one halakha, like one law? You're supposed to follow one thing, like when we all came back to Israel, I think like after, I don't know if it was after one of the Beit HaMikdash got destroyed or after the Holocaust, over the centuries, aren't we trying to like unite the people with one
Beyond
like
that,
halakha?
It's true, but there's descriptions of the time of Mashiach, and the most, I used to, when we used to go to the Kotel on Friday night, I used to look at all the different minyanim, people from all over the world, everybody praying a little bit differently, overwhelmingly the same, but a little bit differently. And I used to wonder, how is this thing ever going to work? How are we ever going to work? We've been dispersed for 2,000 years. Now we're back together. How are we ever going to work? How's it ever going to get along? Most complex thing in the world, right? But the descriptions of the Geulah, of the final redemption, are that there would be all those different minhagim, all those different customs would stay in place. So when we're all in Israel someday, all together with the Mashiach, we'll still keep our Syrian Sephardic customs, as the Moroccans will keep theirs, and the Persians will keep theirs. But in terms of overall halacha, there'll be more of a absolute consistency than less. There'll be more. When we get to those final times, there'll be more.
Right.
So our job now is to learn halacha as much as we possibly can. Really, truly learn it as much as we possibly can, because it's the most true roadmap to Judaism, and it's not only is it intellectually very stimulating, but it's incredibly inspiring. And ultimately, will there be absolutely one opinion? Some say yes, some say no. There'll probably be ultimately a few opinions, which is great, because they say that the greatest argument and the argument that will live forever is the argument l'shem shamayim. So when two people are arguing a position in Jewish law or Jewish perspective, both of whom are sincere and want to fulfill God's will, that argument is an eternal argument and will be memorialized forever as a beautiful thing. So, God willing, Mashiach will come someday, and we'll figure out some of the open questions in halacha. But in the meantime, the different opinions and the different minhagim are extraordinary, and they're dynamic, and that's what was saved. That's what was saved in Hanukkah. Yeah.
Rick, so is prayer only defined by the playbook, or is prayer also when they say pray to God in your own, thought process?
Right. So the obligation that men have to pray 3 times a day is now defined by the prayer book.
Right.
And the obligation of women to pray once a day is defined by the prayer book. But
Right.
the reality is you could pray 100 times a day.
Right.
And prayer is a state of mind and all that kind of thing. So
Right.
rabbis felt at a certain period of time we needed to formalize it into a prayer book.
Got it.
But for a long time, thousands of years, it wasn't.
Right.
So today we do that, and but it's about being just in that state of mind. So
But the other stuff still counts.
the other stuff counts, sometimes more. There's a beautiful story. We'll close with this. A beautiful story. I may have shared it with you, of a very poor man, uneducated, poor young man in a village several hundred years ago. He couldn't read or write, as most people couldn't, but the poor people particularly. So he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to pray. So the rabbi told him, "Do you know any letters of the Hebrew alphabet?" He said, "I know some." He said, okay, go up to the Hechal, go up to where the Sefer Torah are, and just keep repeating the letters you know over and over and over. Just
Wow.
keep repeating them over and over and over. And Hakadosh Baruch Hu will put them into words to express what you want to express.
I
So,
love
you
that.
know, that's really what prayer is. It really
Great.
is.
I love that.
And
It's
we
really,
should use it.
yeah,
we should use it.
that brings it all together. So the
Right.
truth of the matter is, if it's a jumble, he's gonna unscramble it.
He is gonna unravel it.
Right. Okay, great.
All right, let's recap very quickly. Mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, meaning we believe that even if someone is doing something not out of absolute sincerity, it's still good. Because like encouraging children to learn by giving them snacks and little toys and something like that to learn Torah, like was done by the Hashmonaim, that had great value because ultimately a person will do it for good reason. So it shouldn't be looked down upon. In fact, if you can encourage people to do something, do it. Encourage them any which way. We should never rain on a parade. Meaning, if it's a good time, if it's a happy time, if it's a happy day, like Purim or Hanukkah or any Yom Tov or Shabbat, we shouldn't talk about things that are saddening. We shouldn't talk about things that will take any of the positive laughter or happiness or energy out of the room. There's a distinction between when women were an integral part of the miracle and when they led the miracle. In Hanukkah, we say that they led the miracle, and therefore there's a strong custom, and some people say it's a din, that women shouldn't do any work during the time that the candles are lit, even if men do. The men are not obligated to fully enjoy the candles as much as the women are, and that's to celebrate the fact that in this case, it's not af en hayu ba'ato hanes, it's that the fish and na'asa hanes ali adam. The miracle was done by their hands. Good. Any other questions, thoughts?
That's great.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Nice to see you. Carol, take care. Bye-bye, Joy. Thank you.
Have a
Thank
great-
you.
have a great
Thanks,
week,
Ricky.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Rick.
Thank you,
Great
Jake.
class.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.